Okay. Instead of clap, I'm just gonna... Okay.
I had made up my mind about Nine Inch Nails pretty much the moment I knew they existed. The early 90s was the peak of my elitist tendencies, especially when it came to music. So when Marilyn Manson and Nine Inch Nails both showed up at more or less the same time, after I'd seen the videos for The Beautiful People and Head Like a Hole, I pretty much figured I had their number and dismissed them immediately. I mean, what are these guys going to show me that I haven't already been exposed to? I mean, I've already been into G.G. Allin. I've seen the Impotent Sea Snakes live. Edgy nihilism specifically engineered to outrage the older generation? That hadn't been new to me since I learned about the Fugs.
Monday, nothing. Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday and Thursday, nothing.
So watching as people were either titillated or else repelled by these noisy miscreants, it all just seemed so staged and orchestrated to me. Nothing to see here. And then, thanks to their success, came the bands in their wake. The White Zombies and Rammsteins and Systems of a Downs and a whole host of others, some of whom probably existed before they did but didn't rise to popularity till afterwards. I'm not sure of the history, but the idea is the edges between what had previously, for me, been the alternative synth-heavy industrial movement and the more guitar-heavy hard rock and metal bands, those edges began to blur. But not that I really care all that much. Is Nine Inch Nails some form of industrial metal? Seems plausible. I know some metalheads that want nothing to do with Trent Reznor, and others that worship him as a deity. Yeah, the music is synth-heavy, but it's still heavy. But I have noticed that Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails have kind of the Radiohead thing going. Here's what I mean by that. All the other bands that came out about the same time have all more or less gone by the wayside, but people are still talking about Radiohead 30 years later. And the same is true of Nine Inch Nails. And I do have to cop to the fact that I really liked the incidental music that Trent Reznor wrote for The Watchmen. And so, why the downward spiral? This album is one of the few on my original list for season 2, at Emily's suggestion. But in order for us to make room for the recordings that Astrid wanted to cover, we removed it from the season 2 lineup. And hey, the music is heavy, so putting it in Metal Month seems at least understandable, even if some metalheads I know would disagree. Either way, time for the downward spiral.
Downward Spiral, Nine Inch Nails. Sorry if my camera works a little shaky here. The biggest thing that I've found interesting about this album is kind of a generational issue. My dad, we were talking about this a little before the filming, before this video came out, but he kind of said it sounds like music, but if construction work is happening in the background the whole time, which I can definitely see and agree with, but I think it's something with this, like my generation and maybe the generation younger, that has been conditioned to like kind of noise music. So I didn't find it as distracting, and honestly, I found it to work very like naturally within their sound.
Well, what can I say about what I just heard?
Noisy little character, isn't he?
Well, there is that. Mr. Self-Destruct. It sounds as if there might actually be a song going on behind the road construction. But I do like Adrian Belew's guitar madness at the end. It sounds like one of those repeating figures etched into the runoff groove, like you find on Sgt. Pepper's or Piper at the Gates of Dawn. The drums at the end of Piggy are wild too. They don't sound like what would be available for programming in 1994, so I have to assume that Trent Reznor actually played them live. Which is impressive in a, like a drumbo kind of way. The synth bass figure that opens Heresy sounds a lot to me like, of all things, Jan Hammer's opening to Star Cycle from Jeff Beck's album There and Back. And yes, Eric, I agree, it should be called There and Beck. March of the Pigs has this very fast, aggressive 7 to open the song. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's also the second song that mentions pigs in the title. I'm going to have to look into that. I also noticed that starting with the song Ruiner, the mix contains little intrusive noises, little bips and fuzzes and statics that appear in weird places in the stereo mix, as if there's something in the room with you. It's almost as if the album is trying to draw attention away from itself, which is kind of a weird move. The Becoming starts in a very odd time signature, 15/8, with alternating bars of 7 and 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Musically, though, the most interesting thing I hear in the first few listens is the piano part in I Do Not Want This. It has that uncanny valley quality of being close enough to a traditional diatonic key that it feels all the more odd when it strays from it in unusual ways. Check it out. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. That's a nice part, that. Starting with Big Man with a Gun, though, the rest of the album feels like a ramp up ultimately to the title track, with Hurt serving as the album's denouement, kind of like Good Night After Revolution 9 on the White Album. And speaking of Hurt, it has more of those uncanny valley type chords, but this time largely leaning on the sharp 4, the Lydian mode. If I'm pulling anything away from the overall sound of the album on these first couple of spins, it's this. It's a technological thing. Look, once we were able to digitize audio, digitize music, the possibilities for creating music opened exponentially. I mean, look, you used to have to mechanically or electrically produce a sound in a studio or on a microphone in order for that sound to appear in a recording. Digitization got us over that hurdle. And so now the sonic palette for music has lost all its limitations. For those of you that don't know, in the middle of the last century, there was a musical movement called musique concrète. And it was the notion that you could record the sounds around you, just the ambient noise, and then arrange them into musical pieces. So these musique concrète composers like Eldab and Schaeffer, who had to invest and in some cases invent elaborate tape and wire recording devices in order to extract audio from around them. Well, we can now compose and realize music in software, the same way we can compose documents in a word processor. And I think that Trent Reznor was one of the first to see those possibilities and start pushing that envelope. The Downward Spiral certainly shows some of that, I think. And while that acknowledgement is an intellectual nod of innovation on Trent Reznor's part, it is not necessarily an endorsement of the album's artistic merits, at least not so far. The music just by itself isn't doing all that much for me. Look, there are some interesting passages to be found in the songs, for sure, but the songs as a whole don't have enough in the music department to hit me emotionally. We're not done yet, though, folks. I still have no idea what Trent is singing about. Digging through that's going to take a minute. Be right back.
But yeah, I found that to be a really interesting kind of dichotomy between the generations, maybe even a juxtaposition, using big fancy words. But yeah, I liked it. It's noisy, but I like noisy, so I thought that was really interesting. Okay, that's my feedback.
I have a lot to say here, but I want to start with an observation about the song Closer. The Leonard Cohen song, Hallelujah. It is not a romantic, worshipful love song. It's a dirge. It's about being beaten bloody so often by love that you're done with it entirely. Maybe there's a God above, but all I've ever learned from love is how to shoot at someone who outdrew you. It's not a cry you can hear at night. It's not somebody who's seen the light. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. People still play it at weddings. Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. It is not a patriotic ode to the United States. It is a song about the complicated and often hurtful relationship that many people have with America, especially after the Vietnam era and the ensuing loss of trust in American political institutions. Born down in a dead man's town, the first kick I took was when I hit the ground. You end up like a dog that's been beat too much till you spend half your life just covering up that you were born in the USA. But people still play it at political rallies. So with those things in mind, might I suggest you actually listen to Closer all the way through before you put it on as a prelude to something hot and heavy? It's not a song about animal sexual attraction. It is a song about self-loathing. Okay, with that out of the way, I actually need to get into a couple of things that are much heavier. I do a lot of reading and I do a lot of research when I listen to these albums for a week. And when I found out that Trent Reznor bought the house where Sharon Tate was killed, turned it into a studio called Le Pig, and then had 2 songs on this album named Piggy and March of the Pig, I don't know if it's possible for me to get any angrier at someone. What a cold, insensitive, flippant, callous way to treat the death of another person. I honestly had a hard time reconciling the fact that Trent Reznor still has a career after learning this fact. In my research, though, I did find this quote. Here's what Trent said. While I was working on the Downward Spiral, I was living in the house where Sharon Tate was killed. Then one day I met her sister. It was a random thing, just a brief encounter, and she said, "Are you exploiting my sister's death by living in that house?" For the first time, the whole thing kind of slapped me in the face. I said, "No, it's just sort of my own interest in American folklore. I'm in this place where a weird part of history occurred." I guess it never really struck me before, but it did then. She lost her sister from a senseless, ignorant situation that I don't want to support. When she was talking to me, I realized for the first time, what if it was my sister? I went home and cried that night. It made me see there's another side to things. And reading that helped me some. So it's not that Trent's callous, it's just that he doesn't have much capacity to see the unintended ramifications of his actions. Entitled. And yes, you can make the case that when Pig is referenced in the Downward Spiral, it is Reznor's own relationship to his ego and his fans. But the fact that he couldn't find a word other than pig is still suspect to me. And that brings me to the larger, and for me, the much more painful issue to deal with. I'm about to say some things that are going to be very heavy-handed, and I want to say up front that I do not endorse censoring. I do not endorse in any way limiting an artist's means of expressing themselves, no matter where that goes. I fully, 100% support the open marketplace of ideas. I want every voice to be heard. I want more voices. I understand that the Downward Spiral is a reflection of Trent Reznor's own real and heartfelt struggle with his own bouts of depression and suicidal thoughts. And I definitely support his and all artists' rights to express any and all feelings and to include them in their artistic works. But I lost a father to suicide. I've had many friends and loved ones who've recommended this album to me recently. And I have to believe that what I hear in this album is not what they intended me to hear in this album. I had a hard time getting through these last few spins. This is a trigger warning for anyone watching who has lost someone to suicide. I considered leaving this next bit out, but I don't know that I can, and still give a complete accounting of how this album affected me. Astrid, Melody, Elise, Seth, I'm 100% serious. Don't go there with me for this next bit. Stop the video now. It's not important, and it's not worth getting this angry. In the title track, Trent has the line, "So much blood from such a tiny hole. Problems do have solutions, you know. A lifetime of fucking up things fixed in one determined flash." Trent Reznor is an innovator. He's deserving of the accolades he's received. I'm okay with stating that I learned that fact this week. But I'm never listening to this album again.